Thank you so much for joining me here today to celebrate the Owens River Headwaters Wilderness as a National Wild and Scenic River System. My name is Julia Tawney. I am originally from Portland, Oregon, and first came to the Eastern Sierra in around 2013 on the way back from Zion to the Bay Area. I stopped in the Alabama hills, and immediately I was hooked and amazed by this place. I made the move here in 2017 full-time, and I continue to be amazed by the just plethora of opportunities here to deepen connection to place and recreate. My first exposure to the Owens River Headwaters Wilderness was actually skiing on Chicken Wing and White Wing area. And this summer, I have the opportunity to work with the River Network as a trail ambassador on the Glass Creek Trail, as well as the Deadman Creek Trail area. A little bit about our Trail Ambassador program, if you're not familiar with it. It's a field-based position. Last year, I was a Trail Ambassador for the entire North Zone from Rock Creek to Bridgeport. And my daily activities would range from doing education on trail, interpretive talks, doing light trail maintenance, and sharing and discussing leave no trace values with visitors. So Lindsay Butcher is our full-time trail ambassador in the South Zone this year and has made it through some pretty tough, long days out there. And this year I'm just working in the Owens River Headwaters, thanks to the River Network. The River Network is one of the only nonprofits in the United States dedicated to protecting watershed health and empowering local groups with funding to protect wild and scenic rivers in their area. So luckily enough, this year, Friends of the Inyo received a grant to work in the Wild and Scenic River area in the Owens River Headwaters. So today, amidst poor air quality, as you can see out my window, it's pretty rough here in Mammoth this afternoon. COVID-19 and a lot of challenges our country is facing right now. I hope that for the next hour, you can zoom in and kind of soak into this place virtually. The virtual interpretive talk is a totally new medium and an exciting way to expose people to some of the gems of the Eastern Sierra from the comfort of your computer screen. So I'm really excited to share this with you, this presentation with you today, that you might learn something new about the geology in this area or the meadow, and that you can just kind of relax for the next hour and maybe serve as a distraction from a lot of the craziness going on outside. So we're going to have some interactive parts to this presentation. So if you want to get on your chat box, I'm going to ask a couple questions and you can put a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Or I guess I think thumbs up's the only one you can do. My first question is, how many of you have heard of the Owens River Headwaters Wilderness? You can just chat in the box. And how many have been to the Owens River Headwaters Wilderness or have recreated in this area? Cool, so thank you for responding. We'll have some other opportunities to use the chat later in the presentation. So thank you. All right, so my role this summer has worked closely with the Forest Service, doing wilderness monitoring, as well as some vehicle counting to inform how many people are using this zone. I was really lucky to work with Adam Barnett from the Forest Service and Max Hoffman, who might be on the chat. He's the Student Conservation Association intern doing monitoring and data collection for Cottonwood Creek, which is another wild and scenic river, as well as the Owens River Headwaters Wilderness. So thank you so much, Max, for your work this summer. Also wanted to thank Friends of the Inyo board member Sydney Quinn for taking time to discuss with me some of the historical background to this area. And also former Friends of the Inyo Executive Director Paul McFarland, who is very much involved with the stewardship and advocacy, and we'll hear a poem from him at the end of the presentation that he wrote during his time at Friends of the Inyo. Also wanted to thank Jackie Bedell of the Forest Service, an archaeologist who helped inform some of the cultural history, and Kyle for creating really beautiful virtual interpretive videos that you'll get to see a little bit later. So as Kyle mentioned before, I just wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement. The Owens River Headwaters area is home to indigenous groups, such as the Northern Paiute, who call themselves Katsitika, which basically means eaters of the algae. So this group, their subsistence was based on larvae from Mono Lake, and also the Western Mono Manachi and Central Sierra Miwok were also involved in an extensive summer trading network in this zone, trading goods from the east, like obsidian and rabbit skins, with goods from the San Joaquin Valley and coast. So I just wanted to acknowledge that when we talk about stewardship, people have been obviously stewards of the lands for thousands of years before white explorers. So if you want to type in the chat, what is the first word you think of when you hear Owens River? Side, fish. I see east side. DWP, LA Water Supply. Birds. Thank you for participating. For me, I see tubing on there. Endangered, climbing in the gorge. Bishop Tuff, awesome. Yeah, thank you. So what I think about is pretty much immediately water wars. I think about the water diversion that happened, and obviously the effects that took on the landscape, as well as the agriculture in the Owens Valley. They used to have the agricultural yield of Bakersfield. The Owens River obviously attracts so many visitors each year for fishing, and has a very high recreational value to our economy as well. At the end of this presentation, there's going to be a little resource list. I highly recommend, if you're more interested in learning about LIDWP and the Owens River, to check out the series of podcasts called There It Is, Take It. So it's kind of about the water being taken from the Owens River to supply about a third of LA's drinking supply. So additionally, having the Owens River headwaters with that keyword in there does attract more protection to the zone because it's associated with clean water and a clean drinking supply. All right, so the Owens River Headwaters was designated as wilderness in March of 2009 as part of Obama's omnibus bill that included the Eastern Sierra and Northern San Gabriel Wild Heritage Act. It's approximately 14,721 acres managed by the Forest Service and Inyo National Forest. And when the designation happened, also 19.1 miles of protected wild, scenic, and recreational rivers are also protected. So I'll show you on this map those different sections. So basically, wild, scenic, and recreational kind of range in your ability to access them by road or the amount of development. So as we see on Glass Creek and Deadman Creek, those are designated as wild, only accessed by a primitive trail. And then as we get closer to Deadman Creek Road and Glass Creek Road near Obsidian Dome, that moves into a scenic designation. And then kind of near more of the campgrounds in 395, we go to recreational. Now on the other side of 395 is Big Springs, which almost doubles the amount of flow seeping down from the San Joaquin Ridge and these watersheds into the Owens. So this is one of the wilderness signs on Deadman Creek, and this is Deadman Creek on the other side of 395. So the National Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was passed by Congress in 1968 to preserve certain rivers with outstanding natural, cultural, and recreational value in free-flowing condition for the enjoyment of present and future generations. By free-flowing, we mean free of impoundments or dams. Dams, while they can provide hydroelectric power, also can be devastating to riparian habitat in terms of sediment buildup and have a lot of negative environmental consequences. Less than half of 1% of the nation's rivers are protected as wild and scenic. And by comparison, I was reading on the WSR website that more than 75,000 large dams across the country have modified at least 600,000 miles, which is about 17% of American rivers. So Friends of the Inyo and Owens River Headwaters have a long history of stewardship and advocacy. In talking with Sydney Quinn and Paul McFarland, they shared with me a lot of the work that went into lobbying, visiting DC in the early 2000s to advocate for designated wilderness areas, and had a variety of proposals as part of the Eastern Sierra and Northern San Gabriel Wild Heritage Act that added additions to John Muir Wilderness, White Mountain Wilderness, Hoover Wilderness, Granton Mountain Wilderness. So this protected thousands of acres in the Eastern Sierra. And while the ORH was originally proposed as part of Ansel Adams Wilderness, it got its own designation. Paul McFarland used to lead Stewardship Days in the early 2000s. The photo to the left here is a group that did some work on the Deadman Creek area. One of the biggest threats in this area, and as you saw on the map, is the wide network of OHV roads. And some of the uncontrolled vehicle use would create a lot of sediment buildup on the creeks because people were going off the road into riparian habitat or meadows. And so one of the projects that Friends did was move boulders and rocks to kind of reinforce the areas that are stable for dispersed camping, would also rake up OHV tracks and some other activities just to kind of reinforce where you could camp in that area, because a lot of folks come back to recreate along these creeks. Additionally, Paul was sharing with me there used to be the sixth grade Mammoth class would come out to Deadman Creek to do water quality testing. So it's really been a historical tool for Friends to teach about stewardship. And I guess the first ever Friends of the Inyo Stewardship Day was put on by, was at Deadman Creek. So it's cool to hear about that. It's kind of a background to Friends' relationship to the ORH. The historical use of this area and the planning that's gone into the ORH has changed pretty greatly and has often been a collision between pro-development and pro-protection. In the early 1900s and 1800s, sheep grazing was in this area and unrestricted timber use. In the 30s, as more folks were able to access the Eastern Sierra with the building of roads and advancements of technology with transportation, people started coming up here and realizing, whoa, like there is some pretty incredible value to this place, and we need to protect it from the development that's happening. And these kind of two values of development, as we see in so many wilderness stories, development and the inherent ecological values in this area kind of came a little bit of a collision. So in the 1980s, there was a potential alpine ski area that was going to be connecting Mammoth Mountain to June Mountain via San Joaquin Ridge. And because San Joaquin Ridge is a lower elevation than most of the Sierra Crest, it receives the same storms or a similar storm pattern to Mammoth, which provides really great skiing. Obviously, building an alpine ski area would greatly affect the groundwater and disturb animals, and have a variety of environmental consequences. So Sydney Quinn was telling me that Jenny Smith, the author of Mammoth Lake Sierra, kind of put together a loose group of volunteers and kind of drove the charge against this outlined plan. And even in the 1988 forest plan, they had a map of this area. If you can see number 14 here, and you see San Joaquin Mountain and Two Teats, and here's San Joaquin Ridge. We have Mammoth Mountain in June. Site 14 was designated as, or an alpine, potential alpine ski area. So with the wilderness designation, it's protecting this area from development in the future and encouraging activities like Nordic skiing that are less intrusive. There's a ton of dispersed camping in that area as well, and looking towards the future, wanting to keep in mind the sustainable recreation plan in the Owens River Headwaters Wilderness. So why do we want to protect this area? Why is it important? Well, the Owens River Headwaters has an incredible array of wildlife and biodiversity. It has one of the largest stands of old growth red firs in the region. Because the San Joaquin Ridge is low and receives more precipitation and shade, red firs thrive in this habitat and provide habitat for other animals as well. The water sustains a non-native brook trout, which sustains the renowned fishery in the Owens River. And it has one of the highest, it's one of the most diverse areas in terms of butterflies in the Glass Creek Meadow. Additionally, the Glass Creek Meadow, you will see the Yosemite toad. Even on a couple of my visits earlier in the summer, I saw the Yosemite toad, which was placed on the endangered species list in 2014. Additionally, the northern goshawk is a medium-large raptor. It's considered a bird of special concern that also loves nesting in red firs, and kind of prowls around the Glass Creek Meadow. The Glass Creek Meadow area can also serve as a migration corridor for mule deer. And pine marten are also found in this area, especially near the red fir forest. And then the meadow is home to and habitat for a variety of rodents, such as the mountain vole and a variety of mice. All right, so now we're gonna get out in the field. Kyle and I got to go out and take some little interpretive clips out on the Glass Creek Meadow Trail. One of the ways that the Wild and Scenic River system is evaluated is through something that we call outstanding remarkable values. And on the Forest Service Resource Assessment, which you can see on our resource list after the presentation, you can see some of those outstanding remarkable values for Glass Creek Meadow. One of those is the geology and also the botany in terms of the meadow. So enjoy these next few clips about the geology and meadows. So here we are at the Glass Creek Dome flow, and in front of me I have three great examples of extrusive igneous rocks that flew out of this pyroclastic volcanic eruption. You can see this black, smooth volcanic glass is obsidian. And as you can see, this obsidian has some specks of crystal in it. Obsidian cools really fast, so the rock doesn't have enough time to form a lot of the crystals, as you see in an intrusive igneous rock like granite. And then as we come down here, we see streaks of pumice, which as it cools traps the volcanic gas and is much lighter in terms of density. So you have this super dense obsidian and then the lighter pumice. And it forms kind of these really cool striations and grooves in the rock. So if you look around, you can see a ton of examples of this. Up here, we have an example of the lighter colored rhyolite and pumice mixed with even a little obsidian up here too. So after the explosion, as these rocks cool in different ways, we see kind of three different forms of these extrusive igneous rocks kind of forming these boulders throughout the flow. And interestingly enough, though these rocks look really different, they have a similar chemical composition. So one of the things that makes the Owens River Headwaters so unique is the amazing display of geology that surrounds this zone. To the north of us, we have Obsidian Dome, which is closest to 395. And then along the Glass Creek Meadow Trail, you can see just to the south, the Glass Creek Dome. And on the other side of Deadman, you're going to see the Deadman Creek Dome volcano. So what is a dome volcano? Well, dome volcano, this is kind of a cut-in of one of the domes. Basically magma, which is the hot liquid beneath Earth's surface, comes out of a vent, and the lava cools very quickly and creates a steep convex slope on the side. So on Obsidian Dome and Glass Creek Dome and Deadman Creek Dome, you'll kind of see these large boulders with a variety of extrusive volcanic igneous rock. So as this is coming out, they kind of create this melt of pumice and rhyolite and obsidian like we saw earlier. So the eruptions of these domes are what we call a phreatic eruption, which is basically where magma meets the groundwater and creates somewhat of a steam explosion. With Glass Creek and Obsidian domes, shortly after, they experience pyroclastic eruptions. And what we talk about this is a very volatile, powerful volcanic eruption where gas propels magma into the air. That's where we see ash displayed everywhere, pumice, and another word for that is tephra. So right in front of us and along the Glass Creek Meadow Trail, you'll see pumice littered everywhere. And this may have been from the dome explosions, but also could have been from the Inyo craters or places a little farther away, as pumice can blanket the landscape for miles. So as we talked about earlier, obsidian and pumice, very different densities. However, they're composed chemically. One just traps more volcanic gas, while the other one cools quicker, creating more of a glass, smooth texture. Just to show you an example of the density, we can see how pumice floats because of all that volcanic gas that was trapped as it cooled. Where opposed to this dense piece of obsidian, automatically junks to the bottom. So pretty neat seeing just the variety of rock that, while it's composed similarly chemically, looks totally different. Another interesting thing about this area is the line of domes and craters that pretty much start north of us at Mono Lake at Poa Island, which is that island in the middle of Mono Lake, goes all the way down to Inyo craters. And on a map, you'll see that they're pretty much in a north to south alignment. And scientists believe this is because of a dike or a narrow fissure that filled with magma where all this volcanic activity took place. So when did these volcanoes erupt? Well, in 2006, Connie Miller did a study that basically dated tree rings that were, or deadwood trees that were littered on San Joaquin Ridge as well as White Wing Mountain, that basically would explain why the trees died, which they believe were the eruptions. So Miller and her group of scientists discovered and dated that that the Glass Creek, Deadman Creek, and Obsidian Dome eruptions took place in around 1350 Common Era. So as you can see on White Wing, you still see evidence of these deadwood trees today,
White Wing is a very popular ski area. It's around 10,000 feet, whereas where we are on the trail, we're around 8,500 feet. And it was also a candidate for a national monument. A lot of research is going on at White Wing Mountain regarding climate change studies and tree ring dating with some of the medieval period volcanic eruptions that took place. So welcome to Glass Creek Meadow. Glass Creek Meadow is one of the gems in an incredible ecosystem service in the Owens River Headwaters. Glass Creek Meadow is considered a subalpine meadow, which is categorized as between 8,000 and 9,500 feet and is almost a mile long, making it one of the region's largest subalpine meadows. To our left, we have Rainbow Ridge and June Mountain. Behind us, we have San Joaquin, where a ton of seeps and springs will come and funnel through this meadow. And then also to the right, we have White Wing, which gets a lot of snow as well. The San Joaquin Ridge does experience a lot of weather similar to Mammoth Mountain, receiving those storms from the Central Valley and going over the lower elevation ridge. So the thing about meadows I like to describe, and I'm going to use a sponge here, is they do soak up a lot of that snow melt that we see. As you know, the California climate, or the climate in Sierra Nevada, doesn't receive a ton of rainfall. So meadows are really relying on the snow melt. In the Sierra Nevada, there are 200,000 acres of meadows, and about 40 to 60% of them are considered in a degraded state. So there's a ton of initiatives and projects working to restore meadows to their natural state because they are critical habitat for a variety of endangered species. So whether you're a pollinator or an amphibian or a carnivore, the meadow provides a variety of foraging and breeding habitat for so many species in the Sierra Nevada. An endangered species, the Yosemite toad, you can find here. Earlier in the season, you'll see this meadow speckled with wildflowers and butterflies. You might catch a bird flying overhead, swooping down to pick up a mouse or a mountain vole. A healthy meadow, you'll often see the channel kind of like a snake-like form as we see here. It's relatively shallow, which provides more of a groundwater recharge and more of that filtration. In an unhealthy meadow, you'll kind of see a very steep, eroded stream that, especially when that spring snowmelt hits, it won't do as quite an effective job of that sponge-like filter that we see with a channel that's kind of snaking its way through the meadow. Another aspect of meadows is their ability to sequester carbon and keep all that organic material. Though meadows make up only 2% of the Sierra Nevada landscape, they can hold about a third of the organic matter in the region. So that's quite a substantial number. If you look on the banks of the meadow, you'll see lodgepoles, and in typical meadow succession, lodgepoles, a meadow will start as a lake from the glacial period. If you can imagine the area we are in right now, full of ice and then melting. In these flatter zones between ridges, you'll see lakes as those glacial deposits. And then over time, as vegetation and sediment builds up on the sides of the lake, a meadow will start to form. And then thousands of years later, eventually the lodgepoles will encroach and it'll turn back into a forest. There's a little bit of debate as to whether the lodgepole encroachment is due to climate change, whereas as the temperature is rising, lodgepoles are going to start creeping into the meadow. And throughout this area, we'll see some very young lodgepoles, young growth trees on the outside and periphery. If you make it up the Glass Creek Meadow Trail, which I'd highly recommend to just experience this beautiful place, please try to respect walking on the meadow and try to go around the meadow into the lodgepole forest. You can still get great views and experience the beautiful wildflowers that happen earlier in the summer. Or maybe even just sit quietly on the side and you'll observe wildlife crossing. So definitely an amazing place to check out, but please be mindful as you come up here with meadows, as they are a very important service to us here in the Sierra Nevada.
All right, well, thanks for enjoying those virtual clips. As you saw in the last clip, Glass Creek Meadow is obviously very yellow here. And in the earlier season, it's green and they're mini wildflowers. So now you're gonna get the chance to test out your wildflower ID knowledge. So if you want to get back onto your chat box, pull mine up real quick. You can, I'm gonna show some images and then you can chat in what you think the wildflower is, and then I'll share the common name. Obviously these are just 5 of some of the ones I saw in the earlier season and took photos of. There are many more wildflower species that are in this meadow. So we'll do a quick test round. So if you want to chat, if you know the name, yep, we're seeing a lot of names. This one's pretty easy. Another second here. I know you can kind of cheat from your neighbor on the chat box, but still
They
fun.
got that one really fast.
I know. Or it's lupine.
Yeah.
So there are almost 70 species of lupin. They can look very different. Some are like longleaf lupin you'll see in the meadow. Some are closer to the ground. You'll see a lot of these dwarf lupin along the trail in the pumice section. All right, now we're gonna go to the next slide here. Okay, so we'll start with A. So if you want to type in the box what you think A is. Okay, I'm seeing some correct answers. Awesome. So as you saw in the chat, these are ranger's buttons that when they blossom, they create this really beautiful white fuzzy flower. Very easy to identify throughout the meadow. All right, now we're gonna head to the next image, B. So if you want to type in what you think B's common name is. Okay, I see some options here. All right, so this is called slender cinquefoil, which maybe Pontatilla is the correct or a different name for it. But basically, cinq in French, it's 5, and so you see the 5 flowers, and then you can see the leaves below. There are a variety of cinquefoil flowers in the Eastern Sierra. All right, so this one's just one in itself, and it's one of my favorite flowers. It is dying here, so it's not as vibrant as it usually is, but go ahead and chat in. So they call it the common name little elephant heads, and if you see down here on the flower, it has kind of a little bit of a trunk and 2 eyes. So that one's super beautiful. Okay, now we're gonna go to D. So you can type in what you think common name of D is. So yeah, this is meadow penstemon. And now we'll move to E and, oh, sorry, that was early. So I gave you that one, but it's Lewis's monkey flower, which has a very distinctive pink color found along stream sides. And all of these are found in Glass Creek Meadow. So I hope you enjoyed that little fun trivia, and it's always fun to go to the meadow and ID flowers and learn new names as a way of connecting to nature. So thanks for joining in on the fun little botany trivia. All right, next up we have quite a treat. Paul McFarland wrote this poem when he was working with Friends of the Inyo. He used to lead 5 hikes up to Glass Creek Meadow every summer, so he's kind of the interpretive genius of this zone. And I hope you enjoy this piece, and Kyle overlaid it with some beautiful footage of the trail. And it's read by our Stewardship Director, Alex Todd. And so I hope you enjoy. It's about 3 minutes long, and this is a poem called A Meadow in the Moonlight, about going to Glass Creek Meadow and having a picnic in the moonlight. So I hope you enjoy as part of a historical aspect to the Owens River Headwaters.
Glass Creek Meadow, Owens River Headwaters. Where It All Begins, A Meadow in the Moonlight, by Paul McFarland. LA's water, the best stuff, begins here 100 times at once, from over 100 seeps and springs, isolated, idiosyncratic flows tucked away inside the boundary lines of the Owens River Headwaters wilderness. Some tumble loudly past crimson columbine, others weep gently through watercress and pillowed moss. Many disappear down into water-hungry pumice soils, and then surface somewhere downslope closer to LA, where this porous pumice sponge meets concrete solid granite. We came to meet some of these springs, to walk on the sponge, climbing up Glass Creek Falls, where the granite squeezes the sponge, forcing hidden water to the sky, making silent flows sing under sun and stars. Dippers, bouncing and blinking with transparent eyelids, nest here in ferny grottos under this modest fall, alongside now wild brook trout dumped one day from a coffee can. Panting from the climb, we finally slow down enough to listen. The boisterous chorus of water over the falls gives way to a whisper above the falls. The pumice sponge has swallowed the creek again, silently under our feet, twirling downslope past the roots of willow, lodgepole, Jeffrey, and whitebark pine. The water moves, bound for the falls, bound to tumble past Big Springs and founder in Crowley Reservoir, bound for endless meanders spooning abandoned oxbows below Winneduma and Williamson on the Owens Valley floor, bound for miles of aqueduct darkness, bound for a million sinks, tubs, and 10-quart saucepans. Moving again upstream against the silent water, we're bound for Glass Creek Meadow. Over a sensuous pumice ridge, the last sentence written by a dying glacier. San Joaquin Peak, Deadman Pass, and Two Teats draw the western horizon of the watershed divide. To the west of the Sierra Crest, prayed-for winter snows melt into the San Joaquin, irrigates California's Canaan, and what's left flows out to the Golden Gate. To the east, towards us, meltwater and summer downpours flow from the crest, soak into the pumice sponge, and then, miraculously, today a little bit helps quiet the dust of Owens Lake while feeding legions of birds commuting between continents. We're bound for Glass Creek Meadow, for loggers' ales, wines, bread and cheese, for sitting up here at the source, waiting to see what comes next, for the walk back, landscape mellowed under full moonlight, for beginning again 100 times at once.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that treat. Big thank you to Paul for letting us use that program, and Kyle and Alex for participating in the presentation of it. Also hope it was a nice little escape from the impending smoke outside right now. So as part of a Wild and Scenic River, the Forest Service does a comprehensive resource management plan. And just this August, they put out their draft of the resource assessment, which is going to all be linked on our resource list shortly after the presentation. But they are asking for public comment and public engagement. So if you want to get involved with sharing any kind of insight or things you've seen on the trail that might add to that resource document, definitely check out that opportunity for public engagement after the presentation on those links that we will send out. So kind of in conclusion, the Owens River Headwaters Wilderness reminds me of the importance of advocating and highlighting the areas, because if we don't talk about these areas, as Paul McFarland kind of taught me in our discussion, they can become a threat to development. And so keeping this gem and treasure that the Owens River Headwaters Wilderness is to us is really important in protecting the Eastern Sierra. Thank you so much for joining with me today. I hope that you might have learned something new interpretive-wise, and about this area, and that it might inspire you to speak up or write a letter like those people in the 2000s did, community members, and here to advocate for this area as wilderness. So thank you, and if there's any questions, we can talk about that.
Thanks so much, Julia. That was really great. We don't have too many questions just yet, but I just want to remind everyone, you can send your questions into the chat box and we will get to them. Got one question here. When is the best time to visit the Owens River Headwater Wilderness area?
I definitely think that might be kind of an individual choice. As a backcountry skier, I love visiting the Owens River Headwaters in the winter. If you want to experience wildlife and flowers, and definitely like late June, early July, you can still see snow on the San Joaquin Ridge as the backdrop, and also get to experience a greener meadow than what we saw in our film there. So I think it's kind of a personal choice. Yeah, I'd say birds and flowers would be June and July, depending on the snow year.
Yeah. Another question here. Is Glass Creek Meadows currently affected by any fires?
No. So Glass Creek Meadow is not affected by the fires. I think the only thing that's affecting this side of the crest right now is just the smoke from the fire, but not currently affected, no.
And another question here. Is there always water flowing? Does it flow year round?
Well, Deadman and Glass Creek are considered perennial, I believe. So they are flowing year round. I think every year, but I can double check on that.
Cool. And see a question come in. Are there any California toads, or are there only Yosemite toads in the area? Do you know?
That's a really good question. I am not 100% sure. I just know that Yosemite toads, because they're endangered, I don't know a ton about California toads, but I can definitely look into that, and Patricia can send you an email after this with some follow-up.
Cool. And maybe a question, Julia, maybe you know this one. Someone says, I read that Dave McCoy had proposed putting a ski lodge in Grass Creek Meadows. Was this really a part of the ski area development plan that you had referenced before?
That's a really good question. I think I've heard rumor of putting it in the meadow, but obviously that'd be a pretty poor choice for construction, just in terms of like the soil. I don't know if that was actually part of the plan, but that'd be a really good question to follow up with some of the board members.
Maybe in the resource sheet that I'll be sharing in just a little bit, you can see in the map, and then maybe there's some more information in some of those links. Mm-hmm. Julia, does LADWP manage any of the water directly in Glass Creek Meadows? And specifically, the question is LADWP required to maintain flows into Owens Lake, so a little further downstream, but do you know?
So they don't, the Forest Service is managing like that whole area that we saw as designated Wild and Scenic River. And then of course, after that infrastructure, LADWP is responsible for, I'm not sure where the actual line is, but Crowley kind of serves as the reservoir for the water, goes through the dam and continues the flow. So they are managing that aqueduct. Yeah,
I know they have a lot of programs to spread water in like flooding pools, and they have a lot of irrigation systems, and they put a lot of money into spreading water on the lake to keep the dust down and to sort of rehabilitate some of the shoreline that draws so many birds to Owens Lake. That's just about all the questions that we've got. If you have any last ones, send them in. Thank you again all for joining. And if you want to learn more about Friends of the Inyo and what we do and what work that Julia and our trail ambassadors are working on, go to friendsoftheinyo.org, or go ahead and send me an email at kyle@friendsoftheinyo.org, and I'd be glad to answer your questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and close.
And a big thank you
Oh,
to
go ahead, Joe.
the big thank you to the River Network also for sponsoring this interpretive work and my position this summer. Definitely check their website out as well for some other opportunities.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Your work wouldn't be possible without them as a partner. Thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to see you again at a virtual outing very soon. Thank you so much.